Layering is what gouache excels at, but it does have limits or little quirks you have to work around. For example, with regular gouache, not the acrylic type, you always have the chance of reactivating the layers below. So when I try to paint white over the owl here, it doesn't work out so well because I reactivate some of the dark paint and it is very visible in my white paint since the value contrast is so high. I have to do a second layer of white to fight this, but even then it won't be perfectly white. Gouache is very easy to use to add highlights at the end when they're small, but if you want to make a larger portion of your painting white or a completely different color, plan it out with a thumbnail sketch, then make a detailed sketch and don't paint there with any other color. You have to plan out this kind of thing beforehand. This doesn't only apply to white, but also to very vibrant colors. For example, even though I picked up a lot of pink and waited for the yellow to fully dry, you can still see the yellow through the pink here, making an orange. The previous color striking through because it's so bright. And as you can see, it still strikes through even if I just paint in small details. But if I add a little white zinc to the pink, it will make it more opaque and the strike through won't be there anymore. This is a nifty shortcut, but you're paying with less vibrance. So like I said before, try to pick out your general colors beforehand, and if they're extremely different, where they'll be layered, try to paint around that. If they're similar or not too bright, this shouldn't be a problem, as you'll see in a future lesson. This is something you'll get used to doing and planning with practice and trial and error. It largely depends on the kind of colors and brands of paint you use. One more thing to keep in mind when you layer is to use less paint and more water on your first layers, especially if your paper is white. The thicker the first layer is, the easier it is to reactivate it, and then you'll make a muddy mess of colors. If your paper is white, you can use less paint because the white paper shows through and it'll make it look vibrant anyway, and then your second layer will not reactivate the first for sure, so it'll make it easier to layer. This is also just another trick to keep in mind, and you'll get the hang of it with practice. These rules mostly apply to bigger shapes, but with adding detail, it's always super easy no matter how many layers you have. You just have to get the right consistency of paint to water, which is just more paint than water. And sometimes you'll paint straight from the tube. Like we talked about earlier, just remember that the more water you pick up, the less opaque your paint is, and the higher the chance that you will reactivate the paint below is. Getting the feel of it just takes practice. But as you can see, here it blended with the paint below. This can be a cool effect if you do it on purpose. Since our yellow is so bright, it strikes through the blue here, even though I picked up a lot of paint. Notice how easy and perfect the white dots as details are. But if I try to do it on a darker paint and make longer strokes, it does pick up a little of the blue at the edges. You can always do a third, fourth, or fifth layer. Just be sure not to make it too many because your paint can crack. This is more of an advanced technique, but I added a tiny bit of white paint and lots of water. While it's still wet, I can add more paint and this will make a very subtle gradient. I can also paint with more water and less pigment. It will reactivate the paint, but it will also give a dreamy wash effect, and it can be layered. The smaller your strokes are and the lighter your hand is, the less paint will be reactivated. It's really about experimenting with what works for your style. I personally love to paint loose with lots of water. One last thing you could do is lift paint by just wetting it and picking up excess color with a dry brush or paper towel. This can also make a subtle gradient that is getting lighter. If you do this with simple shapes and just play with the ratio of paint to water and practice blending with the layer below or not blending or having a heavy-handed hand or a light hand, you will master the skill of layering. Then it will become second nature and you won't have to think about it, but you have to try to get your hands dirty first and just do it. It's really just about trying this out for yourself and getting used to how the paint behaves. So go ahead and paint out a few shapes, play around with how much paint versus water you use on each shape and how much you use on each subsequent layer, and see how it reacts. Once you get the basics down, you can really play with it and combine different techniques together. Now let's learn one of the most important techniques, blending.